Hi, so in this video we're going to take a look at how you can use getopt to to add options to your bash scripts in a very consistent and easy way. And yeah, this is a very good option parser. I think it's a much better solution than trying to parse those options by using some method of, like trying to parse them yourself by creating some custom function or whatever. There already exists this very nice standard utility. And yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to show you how I parse options in all of my scripts that I write. And yeah, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. So over here, I have this template script that I created. And essentially, what I included in this template is the starting point of like any script that I write. Like this is what I start out with. So let me kind of quickly go through it and tell you what all these things are. So the first line in any of my scripts is also always the version, and not gonna go too deeply into that. That's kind of not the point of this tutorial. But I always have a version included in the script, and I also have an option to display that version if needed. So then this part is related directly to getopt. This is kind of something that that is related directly to what we're talking about here. So what this part does is it runs a check if the getopt version that you have on your system is an enhanced getopt. And if it is, then it lets the script run further, and if it's not, it cancels the whole thing. So that's what this part does. I'm going to explain more about the different parts later in the tutorial. Right now I just want to give an overview. So this is like in a built-in help, like that basically includes a quick reference for what options a script has. So for example, for my search and subs script, I have this. So basically just a one-line explanation of what each option does, and that's like a text that I just put in here into this variable called help, and that's what that is for. Now there's this part. This is where the option parsing begins. This is where getopt actually gets called, and as you can see, it does some parsing, and then there I create a variable called opts. This is where the results of getopt parsing get saved, and then there's also a check if this operation returned any errors. So like it checks if the exit code of the last operation was 0, and if it isn't, then it exits with the exit code 1, which stands for an error. And so finally, this third line in this part is it sets the positional arguments that were passed to the script. So like whatever you pass on the command line. So for example, right now I passed --help and nothing else, but I could pass some file.srt to this script, etc. So these would be all the positional arguments. But getopt, essentially, its purpose is to rearrange all of this so that it can get parsed by using a while read loop over here in a straightforward way. So that, like, for example, if you put an option well, it wouldn't be help. Like with help, nothing would get run, but maybe like just some random option. You could put one option over here, and then like one option over here at the end. And what getopt would do is it would rearrange it, and it would make it so that the options are all in the beginning. Then there would be a end of options option, which is just a double hyphen. And then there will be all of the non-optional arguments. So that's what getopt does, and that is what this opts variable is going to be storing. It's like getopt prints out all of this this like newly arranged line of arguments, correctly quoted and everything, and so we store that into this opts variable, and then we set the position arguments to whatever getopt made for us, basically. So we reset the positional arguments here. I'm going to explain it in more detail in a few moments. So this is what this part does. Now the next part is where I set the default values for all of the different options that I have right now. It's like this is a template, so the only option that I kind of almost basically always have is an option to enable or disable color, so that basically if a user prefers no color, they can always disable colorization. And so this is the default for it. So the default is set to 1, which means enabled, and over here, depending on what option you pass, this variable gets set to either enabled or disabled. So, but there could be also obviously more options here. I don't know what, like option, I don't know. I'll just write option equals, maybe it has some value that is the default value, and then when we parse whatever was passed on the command line, we change this default value to something so that it overrides the default. So that's this is kind of this part. This part always contains all of the defaults in my scripts. That is how I arrange everything. And then finally, kind of not finally, but as for this part, so I'm talking about this right now. This second line in this part of the script, what it does is it also changes the defaults basically based on the config file. So the way I currently do things in my scripts when it comes to config files, I just have a bash file for configuration that I put in the directory according to the XDG directory specification to the .config folder. Then the name of the script, it just says here test script, but for example, if we would take a look at my search and subs script, if I find that part, I have here config file search and subs config.bash, and what config.bash includes, I don't have a config.bash for this template that I was just showing you, but for search and subs, for example, here is a so here is the sample config file that I have, and what I include into that is just a comments.version of this section where all the defaults, just the section that I just mentioned before I started talking about this thing with the config file. Like I just copy all of these defaults and I put them into config.bash and I comment out those lines. So there's a sample config file ready for a user to just edit very easily. And for example, here's my config file that I have on my system, and I have some options here changed from the defaults. So this essentially changes it gives you the user an opportunity to change these defaults to their liking, so that everything is in a nicely arranged order. Basically, first there's defaults like that are baked into the script, then there's a config file that can override those defaults, so essentially these variables get changed to something new if the user wants to do that. And then there's this parsing part where on the command line you can further override these defaults or the configured defaults, like whatever the value of these variables are, the values of these variables are at this point once this part of the script is reached. So yes, so this is what this part is for. This is a config file that changes the defaults if the user wants to do that. And now finally, this is the parsing part where it will have a while I think, like I said before, like a while read loop. It's actually not a while read loop, it's just a while loop that would keep running forever, essentially. But what stops it is this break statement. And as you can see, it stops when it reaches this dash dash option, which, like I explained before, getopt creates for us always. It's always there. That's what the getopts that's what it does. It creates like this standard, nicely arranged sequence of arguments, so that there's always this, like among other things, so that there's always this dash dash option, so that indicates that okay, the parsing of options is done at this point. So that the loop, we can break out of the loop there. But while it's still going through like option 1, option 2, etc., the way we do it is we have a case statement here which evaluates, compares the value of the first positional argument. So whatever the first one is currently, it looks at that and it compares it first with, like, is it dash C, is it dash dash color, is it dash capital C, is it dash dash no color, and if it finds a match, it goes into this part, and then it does the thing. Whatever you put in there, like in this case, it sets this variable to an appropriate value, and then it shifts this argument, so it removes it essentially. So it becomes then it becomes this, like, so that, and then this case statement ends. So now the loop restarts. So now the first argument is option 2, and then it compares that, like does the same thing, and so on until it hits this dash dash option, in which case it shifts it, so like removes the dash dash, and it breaks out of the loop. So at that point the parsing is done, and what you're left with is only the non-optional arguments that were passed to the script in the first place. So then you can simply like do something like I do here in search and subs. So like search and subs accepts, so you can pass files as positional or like non-optional arguments. So that means that like after all of the parsing is done, the only thing that I'll have in the positional arguments is the files. And so like when I get to the point in the script where I need to work with the files, I don't need to like create a separate array or anything. Like all of the files are already positional arguments, so I can simply work with that. And well, in this case I do a for like a C style for loop where I loop through, I set I to the value of 1 because the positional arguments go like $1, 2, 3, etc. The 0th one just contains the name of the script or the path to the script file, but we are interested in the ones that come after that. So positional argument 1 will be my first file, and that's what I set this I to, and so I will loop until I is less than or equal to the length of the entire positional arguments array, you could say, like, and until on each run of the loop I increment the I, so it will just keep going. I equals 1, and then we have an appropriate value here, and so this way you can easily work with those positional arguments after they've been parsed out by getopt, essentially, by this procedure. Yeah, so like this is just an example of how getopt simplifies the workflow, just like the workflow, not so much the workflow, but the script's internal mechanisms, essentially what you have available to you as a programmer when you program. it just like it makes things very neat and clear, so that there's not like a bunch of like, oh, I need to skip that argument and I need to only like get that like argument that could be either like the second or the fifth or the like whatever. It's just clearly only the ones that were non-optional. They are now the what is what this series of positional argument contains. And you can kind of design your scripts with that in mind. You can think, oh, okay, I'll have all the positional arguments after this parsing is finished. I'll have them in only non-optional ones there, and then I can think of like, okay, I'll make the files the positional arguments so that I can just easily look through the files, because they are the most kind of maybe most sort of like one of the central things in the script. Getopt improves things in how easy it is or how difficult it is to deal with these kind of design decisions too. So this is the parsing part, and then what else can I say about this? So yeah, this is kind of it in a nutshell. We'll get into a bit of more detail about what kind of options you can have here, and like depending on the kind of option, you might have different things that you need to put in this part. Yeah, like the only thing that like this last one is, if essentially if there was some problem, you might have forgotten, or like you might add an option here, like you might add an like option, but you forget to have it here. Let's say like you should have included this, but you forgot. In this case, the loop will, or like the case statement will keep going in it, like, so like, okay, it's not none of this, and it's not the end of options either. So what is it? Like, this is an error, and then it prints this internal error message saying that like you messed something up. You need to kind of take a look at what option you forgot to add to this loop, because otherwise it would just probably you might enter like into an infinite loop or something, but this way it just prints an error and tells you that there's an issue there that you need to address. So, okay, so this is the template. Now let's kind of take a look at it in more detail into the let's take a look at what exactly happens in each of these steps in more detail. So I created this, essentially I copied this template script into this new file. I called it getopt demo, and I added some things so that it's easier for us to see what happens at each step. So I created this print demo message function, and it's not really important what it does here, but like when you call it, the first argument is just a message that's gonna get printed, and the second one is let me just run it and it'll make more sense. So let's what is it, get a demo, call it 1 2 3 and -c, for example. So what I make it print out here, like this is just kind of the title of the message, and this is the contents of the message. Where like, and I make the contents of the message basically the code, and in like this the first case, the second, and the first case, the third, and the fourth, I have just all of the positional arguments there printed out, essentially identically to what you see here when I entered these things on the command line. You can see that the first line is actually the same. I also apply some colorization there so that we can see things more easily and see that like, well, there's an option here, it's like in red, and now it's moved over here. And the second value is, well, this is the value of the opts variable that I talked about, but that it's printed out by using the declare function. I'll explain what that means in a second. So this is just for us to see all the different steps that I described and what happens at each step. So let's take a look at them one by one. Let's see. So I guess the first step doesn't really require any a lot of explanation, because this is just the all of the arguments that were passed on the command line. So like this is it gets printed at this step. It's right after the compatibility check. So like if getopt is the right version, print this. It prints this like initial arguments message. So before getopt messes with what we passed on the command line, we just print it out for us to see. So that's the first step, this initial arguments. And then the second one, before we do anything with the opts variable, once getopt did its thing and there was no error, we print out the contents of the opts variable. So like if there was an error, we pass an option that was not defined here. I'll explain how this works in a second, but if I just pass an option that wasn't defined here, it'll throw an error and not continue any further, because this is where the things got interrupted. So let me see, value of opts. So let's kind of stop here, and I'll go ahead and comment out these other messages that come after, because we'll get there when we get there. Right now, let's just focus on this. So we passed these arguments on the command line. So we passed 3 non-optional arguments and 1 optional. And then we run getopt on that, and this is what we get as the output. So let's talk about what we do here in this part, on this particular line rather. So we do first, like, we assign whatever the output of getopt is to this variable. So we do it with the bash's command substitution. So whatever gets executed in this subshell within the 2 parentheses, the standard output of that gets stored into a variable. So we can actually, I could even copy this thing out of there, and I could run getopt just for testing purposes, just like in the terminal, like this. I'll remove this for now. I'll explain what that does in a second. But so if I just pass like 123-c here, we get the same content as we see here as the value of opts. So that's how it gets it. So we define some options here, which I'll explain in a moment. And after everything is done, after that, like this dash option, which again signifies the end of options, but in this case it's for getopt itself. It means that, like, okay, now we're gonna put everything that we have as positional arguments there, and we do it by passing it this $@ variable, which is actually an array of all the positional arguments. So $@ is the same as $1, $2, $3, etc. However many there are. It will contain an array of that. And so like when we pass it there, it is the same as passing all of the $1, 2, 3, etc., however many there are, but with just one bit of code like that. So that's what that option does, and that's why when I pass exactly the same thing as I did over here, when I passed it to getopt here, we got the same results. So this is what this part receives, or this yes, this is what getopt receives here within the script. I did the same thing out here in the terminal. Now let's now take a look at these options and what they do. Let's take a look at them one by one. So let's first deal with this -n option because that's kind of the easiest one. -n simply is where you can put the script's name. So let's see, remember how I passed a non-existent option? Like let me do it over here. So getopt will throw an error, and here's the error, getopt invalid option, and then it actually outputs everything except the invalid. So you see it skipped the invalid option, but what we're interested right now is actually the error message. So it says getopt invalid option. If you change this, or if you set this -n value, let's call it test script, then it's going to be a test script invalid option. So this is where you can put the name of the script, and the way I get the name of the script is by using this bash source variable. Bash source is actually an array, but we're only interested in this case in the first value in that array, and in bash the way you get the first value in the array is you simply refer to the variable that refers to the array, to the variable itself. So if I did this bash source index 0, it would be identical to just bash source without anything. So these two are equivalent. So let me see. So let me show you what bash source contains. Echo bash source. This essentially contains the path to the script scripts file, and that's where we can get the name of the script from. So I just hacked in like this line echo bash source into my demo script, and if I run it now, we get getopt demo because that was the path that we passed. If I now change to a different directory, for example, and I script template, so if I run it like this, then that's what's going to be that's what becomes the value of bash source. It's whatever path the path was. If it's actually like a script that is added to your to the system's path, then it will print the path that it got from evaluating the path variable. So for example, let me see. So I have my search and sub script hooked up to the so it is on my system's path, and I can, let me just copy this to temporarily to search and subs and show you what happens if I run that. So I ran search and subs there once. So if I run it right now, this is where it found the binary. So it's in my home folder, users home folder, and then in the bin directory, there's this symlink there to the search and subs. So that's what you get as the value of bash source in this case. So let me get rid of that right away so that I don't forget it there in the search and sub script. And yeah, okay, so this is the bash source. So let's go back to our demo script. I'm in the wrong directory, so I'll change back to the script template directory, run it. So this is the value of bash source, but we only need the getopt demo part, and the way you can get rid of essentially what this does, it removes the part of the string, like starting from the beginning of the string, like the so it looks, it matches the */ and it picks the last forward slash that it can find. So basically, in the first case, it will remove the dot slash because that's what the star slash matches to. If I go one directory down and run it from there like that with this longer path, it will remove the script template part. So we always get getopt demo. So this is what this part does. So this is kind of how I get the bash source, get the name of the script from this bash source variable over here. Okay, so now let's take a look at how you tell getopt what options the script will have and what are the valid options and what are not valid options. So the way you do that is you set these two options to getopt, and those are -o and -l. -o deals with the short options that contain consist of only one character, and the -l takes as the argument a string containing all of the long options that can be as long as you want, and the short options get preceded by a single dash on the command line, and the long ones by a double dash, of course. So, but you don't include the dashes in these strings that you pass to the -o and the -l options to getopt. Now, so yes, these are just comma-separated strings of option names. So now let's talk about the kinds of options that you can define in getopt. And there's basically three types. The first type is an option that does not take any arguments. So it's not dash option equals value. It's just dash option, no argument. The second type is an option that requires an argument. So it has to be dash option equals value. The third type is when an option takes an optional argument. So it can be either dash option, or it can be dash option equals value. So those are the three types of options that you have in getopt. So for example, so just to make something up, let me call like an option. So like, yeah, an option that does not take any argument. They're always they're often referred to as flags. So that's what I'm gonna call it just for this example. So dash flag. Let's say this is an option that doesn't take any argument. It's just dash flag, not dash flag equals something that's not allowed. Then there's an option with a required argument. So there has to be a value. And the third kind is an option with an optional argument, which can either take a value or it can be just optional argument, like that. So those are the types. Now you define those types. So let me continue with this theme, and I'll just use these names and just to create some example options here. So I'll create the F option for dash flag, and it's often very useful, and I'll show you why in a moment, to have always have the opposite option for each flag. So I'll always also have no flag. And for the short version, I always use a capital letter to represent that. So F and capital F. And I also need to add a long version here for flag and for no flag as well. So this is for our option that does not require an argument. Now for the second type, let me call it O for option. And if I want to define it as an option that requires an argument, I need to add a colon after its name. that's how getopt works. And for the long version, it's the same. You have to add a colon after the name. It was option. I'll just call it rec arg, because that kind of looks clearer or something. Yeah. And for the option that takes an optional argument, we use a double colon. So essentially the same thing, option opt arg, that's what I'm going to call it, and the double colon here. So this is how you define the types of options in getopt. Now, okay, so now let's take a look at what happens when getopt parses all of this stuff. Basically, when all of the positional arguments of the script get passed to it and the opts value gets stored, we get this value of opts, which will already. So I use this example 1, 2, 3, C. So we have this value now. So what do we do with it? We set now we set the positional arguments. We basically change what the positional arguments are in the script so that we can parse those positional arguments over here in this loop. So the way we change it is we use the set shell built in, and what set does is basically you can change what the positional arguments values are with set. So I'll just hack a bit of code here at the beginning just to demonstrate. So you need to use this dash option to set to do this. So let me set it to just 4, 5, 6, and you can see you'll see now that basically all of these arguments that I pass on the command line here get erased, and we get 4, 5, 6 as our arguments before like anything in the script runs. So we get this value from this first message already. But like before this line runs, it's still 1, 2, 3, C, but then it gets those positional arguments get set to these new values. So that's what set does. Now, I also use eval here, and eval is necessary because what we get as the value of opts is essentially bash code, so it needs to be evaluated as bash code. So what ends up running is set dash dash and all of this stuff that is still stored in the opts variable but as code. So I couldn't run it without eval. That's why it needs to get evaluated. So that's that. And after this operation was performed, we get now the positional arguments of the script get set to whatever like getopt prepared for us. So now it's not just stored in a variable now, but now the positional arguments are actually set to that dash C dash dash 1, 2, 3. So this has been replaced by this. So I've already explained the stuff about setting the defaults in the config file in the previous section of this tutorial, so I'm not going to go over it again. Let's jump right to the parsing part. So this is where now we can talk about how we parse these 3 types of options with no arguments, options with required arguments, and options with the optional arguments. Now we can talk about how we can parse those in this loop. Now let's start with the flags. So the or options with no arguments. In other words, so in this case statement, as you can probably guess, I need to create these strings for that that the value of this first positional argument will be compared against. So dash f dash dash flag. Now, since I'm adding a new option, I'll also need to add a variable for it over here. And let's say that by default this option is disabled. So I'll set it to an empty string like this. So if you don't use anything after the equals sign, it means an empty string. It's the same as just putting some quotes here, but they're not doing anything in that case. So I just do that. Opt flag equals 1. So in this case we set the value of opt flag to 1, which is essentially in our case it represents true. Like in some other programming language that has booleans, we could write like opt flag equals true, but in bash there are no booleans, so that's how we represent the same kind of thing in bash. And then we need to shift that argument so that the loop moves on to the next one in the series. So yeah, let me so I'll use the declare p here, and I'll print out the value of opt flag after the parsing. So now I can pass this dash f, and you can see that now it gets parsed in this fashion that we already familiarized ourselves with. And once it is parsed, so we see that it's set to 1, and it was set to nothing initially. So now let's set up its counterpart, which is capital F no flag, and the counterpart will unset that option, so that basically if the user decides to change this, so that like if we have two variants of this option, so that if a user decides to change the default in the config file, there's always the other one available, so that like there's no, this way the script becomes very flexible in how you configure it and how you use it on the command line. So now if I don't pass any argument, it's an empty string, like opt flag here is an empty string. If I pass the capital F, it's also gonna be an empty string, but now it actually ran things over here. I can just like do like echo test over here to prove it to you that it actually ran there. So like if I don't pass that option, there's no echo test, but if I pass it, there's this test here. So it actually goes in here. Now, also just something I thought of, just to show you what would happen if I forgot to define it and still passed it. So like it wouldn't throw an error because it's a valid option, but our loop would fail. So that's where that internal error message comes in. That's what it's gonna print, that internal there was an error, unable to parse option F. This is basically to signal to you like, oh, you forgot to add an option to your loop, to your parsing loop. So if I add it back, now it works. Okay, so these are the flags, the options with no required with no arguments. Now let's talk about the options with required arguments and the options with optional arguments. So let's actually like define them both aside at the same time, and I will kind of go over some things when it comes to the differences between the two, but there's also a lot of similarities between the two when it comes to parsing. That's why I want to do it so like in the same section. So let's create variables for those. So opt underscore option req arg equals I don't know, just a, and so let's say that that's the default for that option, and option with optional argument, let's set it to be like the default. Now the parsing of these options is a bit different when compared to the flags. So the beginning is the same, basically dash o dash dash option req arg, and then here's what the difference is. So when it comes to this this part now, okay, let me how shall I? All right, let me show to you what happens actually at this stage when at this stage. So I'll stop the script here for a moment, and let me just pass one of those like options with, let's say, I'll pass dash o, or let me use the long one, option required argument equals 1, let's say. So now if I run this, here's what we get as the contents of the opts string. Now let's try out the option with optional argument too, and let's also give it an argument. So as you can see, like, and you could probably, that's what you'd probably expect, that they look the same, so they will be parsed the same too. But now let's take a look at what happens if we actually don't give an argument to the option that does not require it, but has a possibility of taking an argument, but does not require it. The option with an optional argument. So let's not give it any argument, and let's run that. And what we get is we see that getopt creates an empty string as the argument. So giving no argument to an option with an optional argument is the same as giving it an empty string. There is no difference, absolutely, in that case. Like, and I put those quotes there, but they don't really do anything. When I use the equal sign, it already tells getopt that I'm passing something to it, and there's nothing. If there's nothing, then that's an empty string. So you get the same result. So this is something that is important to keep in mind when you're working on your script, that when no argument is passed, you get an empty string in your arguments after all the parsing by getopt is done. Here it is, and if I don't give it any arguments, the same. So that's how things look when it comes to, like, in terms of the opt string. Now the parsing. So with the parsing, since man, I created a lot of text here. Let me just kind of clean it up a little bit. Yeah, let me just leave this. Okay, so now let's see how we can parse it. So yeah, this is where we left off. So option with an optional argument. So the positional argument 1 is the option's name. The positional argument 2 is going to be the value or the argument. So we can simply set that variable to positional argument number 2, and then we need to shift 2 arguments in this case because there was 2 of them. And then the parsing for the options with the optional arguments will look exactly the same, because as we saw, there will be always two arguments. Even if there was no argument, there will be still an argument containing an empty string. So this way the parsing is very kind of straightforward. So let's create that option with an optional argument, and the rest of it will be the same. So we just put this here, and it will assign the value to the variable, and everything will run the exact same way. So I can add those things here to our declare thing, and now we can take a look at what happens when everything gets parsed, and we get all of our values here ready to be used for whatever the script does after the option parsing is complete. Now, so like this is essentially what you need to know when it comes to setting up this code. I did want to explain one thing about a peculiarity when it comes to how you can, like, what getopt accepts as like syntax when it comes to passing options with optional arguments versus the ones with required arguments, because there are some differences. And for this I wanted to so I should close this text editor here for now, and I'll open up the man page for my search and subscript, because I have a section there that explains it. So I'm gonna just use that. So it's this section, and it actually has like a text explanation here, so if you want to, you can pause and read that. But I'm gonna scroll over here to this little table that I have set up over here, and so let's take a look at something that is pretty important to know about, because there are differences when it comes to passing options with required arguments and optional arguments. So when an option takes a required argument, there's basically two possibilities. You can do -o and then pass it the value, and here you can see that value. Alternatively, you can pass them all concatenated like this, just the value right after the option letter, and it will produce exactly the same result. So as you can see, despite the fact that this was this single argument, in this case, getopt still parsed it in the same way. So it split it into two separate arguments. Yeah, in this case, it already was two separate arguments, but it also creates two separate arguments. So in the end, after parsing is complete, both of these situations, in both of the situations, you end up with with an option string parsed in the exact same way, or arranged in the exact same way. But then, if we use an option with an optional argument, we have a capital O there in our demo script. We can only pass the value to it. We can only pass the value to it by attaching it directly to the option letter when it comes to short options. Now I'll move on, explain the long version in a second, but it's very similar. So I couldn't do this because this would mean that value is just non-optional argument. So let me just do the correct way. So this is how this is the only way to pass an option with an optional argument, all concatenated together. And as you can see, like, the parsing was correct. But if I were to forget that it's an optional argument, and I could just and I did this, then it would think that that's actually just like another non-optional argument, and the option with an optional argument had an empty string as its value, because it expects it to be to follow the option letter directly. So this is kind of a peculiarity of getopt, that is important to know about. Like if you want to like be 100% sure and you don't want to remember like if it takes an optional argument or required argument, just put it all together and then it will always be correct. Like I personally don't really like this syntax very much. I would much prefer it if they allowed something like an equal sign there, because that would kind of make the same distinction but make the code a bit more readable when you type those things on the command line. But yeah, I mean, this is how it works. So this is important to know about. Now for the long versions, it's very similar. You have to have what was it, like option qarg equals value and option opt arg equals value. So for the let's talk first about the required. So for required, you could do either the equal sign, which makes it just a single argument initially, but then gets split into two, or you can pass it as two arguments. That would work just the same. But if you were to pass an option with an optional argument, you have to use the equal sign. Again, the same situation. If you don't do the equal sign, the value will end up being just one of the non-optional arguments, and it will think that the option with an optional argument does not have a value. So this is analogous to what we had with the short version. So yeah, this is the kind of the important thing to know about how getopt parses those options. So yeah, let me see if there's anything else to explain here. So essentially we went over the entire process of working of parsing options, and like yeah, okay, so now at this stage I can also uncomment this other demo message that I have here at the bottom, which I kind of forgot about, but that's okay. So what that does is this is just shows us that, like, okay, after parsing, after all this has been done, all of the options have been parsed. So let's even like pass more options to make it more obvious. Well, no, this is the same option. Let's do the opt arg, and let's do like -f2. So here's a bunch of options. So all of this part has been parsed, and we're only left with our non-optional arguments. This is kind of the end of the whole process of parsing the options. So now I also have this this message here that I commented out, just to kind of give you a final demonstration of how easy it becomes to add options when using getopt once you understand this procedure, and it's no longer like doesn't seem complicated to you anymore, basically, once you learn it. So so I have this message here. Let me remove this declare thing that we created to not clutter the output. So it just prints this message. This is a getopt demo, and it does it in the green color. Now I'm not going to explain in this video how to like create colorization. I actually have an idea for another tutorial to make about ANSI escape sequences. This is what these things are called, and you can colorize text with them pretty easily once you understand how they work, even though initially they might look complicated. But in this one, I'm not gonna go into that. Basically, what I wanted to create like a sort of like a demo option to do is to change this this color. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll show you how easy it becomes to add new options once you get how this whole thing works. So I'll actually remove all of the options that we created up until now, because that was just like for explanatory purposes. And basically let's get rid of all of this stuff, and let's start, like, this is essentially what I have had as a template initially. So let me add our new options. I'll just call it O for option. I'm not gonna bother with like coming up with a name, because this is just a demo. I'll create a long version for it too, and I'll add a colon for the short to the short and the long version to signify that it's an option that takes an argument. I'll add a variable for it, opt option, and I'll set the variable by default to this value 32, which indicates the green color. Okay, so we have that. Now for the parsing, I'll just copy this line and I'll go -O option opt option equals $2. Not for shouldn't forget the shift 2 thing, and so now we have let me show you what we have. Declare p opt option. So by default we get 32, but now I can set O to like 31, for example, and now it gets changed over here. So let me remove that declare thing, and let me what the only thing I need to do in this case is simply like break up this string, and I'll just insert here that opt option. Never mind the weird syntax highlighting. This is just gonna become all one concatenated string, but Vim for some reason has this, like, colorizes it green, which is not correct, but yeah, just ignore that. So in this case, like, if I don't pass any value, now that so I added the option, now it's working essentially. By default, if I don't pass anything, it will put 32 there, the default, and so it will look the same as it did in the beginning. But now if I just change it to 31, we get a different color. We get red, and if we use 33, we get yellow, and 34 is blue, and so on. So this is just a quick example of how you can add an option. Now you could also validate the value of this option, and you could do that either within this parsing loop, and you could add some code here, expand this code block and add some code here, and for example check if the option's value matches certain criteria, and if it doesn't, you could perhaps throw an error, for example. Another possibility is you could do that after this loop, so like however you want to do it. So yeah, this is generally how you work with getopt and with parsing options. Like, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video here. So in summary, you can see that getopt is a very efficient and nice way to parse options in bash scripts. It's sort of like a standard way, and once you get the hang of this procedure, adding options becomes very easy, like I just demonstrated, and everything becomes very systematized and neat, and so you can add a config file like this, and that's been taken care of. So like all the sort of like all the things that you need to do when it comes to parsing options and like setting up the defaults and all of that, that's all been taken care of largely, and you only need to add some pretty standard code at the beginning of the script, and then you can move on to working on the script itself, rather than getting like bogged down on thinking like, well, with thinking on how like how I'm gonna parse all the options. It's like the option parsing has been already taken care of, and then you just work with whatever you want to do with your script. And yeah, that's it. So that's why getopt is really great, and that's why this is my it's my preferred method to parse options in bash scripts. So yeah, this is it. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful and valuable, and that it helps you write your bash scripts in a better way. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.